am Brian McAlister. I am a recovering alcoholic and a drug addict. And Sean really deserves a round of applause. This was her idea.
Yeah!
Her and Laura and her whole team, and including her mom, all pitched in here and did all this work, supplied a lot of the artwork, and they're just really incredible human beings. So thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Lord.
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll qualify how we got here, share some experience, strength, and hope, as they say. I'm originally from, that's my RV out there, so I don't live in Jersey anymore. I actually drove in here from Texas, New Mexico area. I left here a few months, really a few years ago, in the middle of COVID. But I'm from Kearney, originally Kearney, New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time in North Arlington. And I'm from a good Irish Catholic alcoholic family. You know, birds fly, fish swim, we drank. That's what we did. You know, we came by it honestly, and I never thought anything of it. It was an interesting growing up in that type of dynamic, and you know, I had a family that loved me. They worked hard, they played hard, but alcohol was always available. It's always what we did. And I've had my first drink just before my 13th birthday. I was hanging out with a guy named Goofy and another guy named Butch. So they were not the Harvard crowd. They were a couple of guys that I knew from the neighborhood, and we decided we'd try to have a few beers. And from the first time I had a drink of alcohol, I fell in love with it. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the feeling, that sense of ease and comfort they talk about from taking the first few drinks of alcohol and drugs. I got that. And from there, I was off to the races. Within a few weeks, I was smoking pot. Within a few weeks after that, I was dropping acid. And before you know it, I thought life was just grand. You know, I had this, I knew why my people drank, because I had that sense of feeling good about Brian, because I never really felt comfortable in my own skin. And that's something that I've heard many, many times over the years from people who have alcohol and drug problems. I felt that I felt like I found the answer, and it was alcohol. So I chased that for a while. Typical story. I won't go through all the details, but typical story. Friends changed, situations changed, grades dropped. I just kind of was off on my own, and I really didn't care anymore. You know, my family was always big on, you know, you had to be the best, you had to have, you know, an education. A B wasn't good enough. Why didn't you get an A? If you got an A minus, why wasn't it an A plus? And I just finally got to the point where I just said, who cares? You know, I don't care. I hated going to school. I hated being told what to do. If you look at it, one characteristic all alcoholics and addicts share is we're defiant. We hate to be told what to do. I still hate to be told what to do, which is part of my makeup. It's who I am. So I find myself in this rigid educational system in a Catholic school, and I fought it all the way. I hated to go to school so much that I went every summer. You know, I kept failing and going and failing and going and failing and going. So eventually they had enough and they threw me out, you know. And then that was another thing that really was a life-altering situation, because here I am, you know, going to a Catholic school, and it's like turn the other cheek and all this forgiving Christ stuff, and all then, you know, I get this attitude. It's you know, first time you screw up, they throw you out. You know, I'm doing dope. I'm doing everything I can to wreck the school, but you know, I'm taking the victim stand. You know, they all said, here I am. They threw me out. Nobody loves Brian. Poor Brian. So I wanted to go to another school, and it was just a place to park myself till I can get out, and that's what I did. By that time, I was 17 years old. That's when I left school, and I was off to the races. Now I figured I could do whatever I want. Nobody could tell me anything anymore. So I'm selling drugs to pay for my own habit. I was always an entrepreneur. You know, I figured the best way to pay for my own was to let somebody else purchase. Thank you very much. And I did that. And I started having bottoms at that. I never realized all these things that were happening to me were the direct result of my drug and alcohol use. So by the time I was that age, I wound up, the cops didn't like me. I was the guy that your parents didn't want you to hang around with. all that good stuff. And I didn't care, because I figured I'd never live to be 30 years old anyway. I figured I'd never make it. So I was just gonna do just what I damn well pleased. So I wound up one night dropping a hit of acid. I wound up in Phoenix, Arizona. So I was like, okay, I'm here, I might as well stay. It was my first geographic change. You know, things were getting rough in the local town, so I wound up saying, okay. And it's amazing, within weeks I found the exact same situations and the exact same people that I left in New Jersey and Arizona. It was 1975, no, 74, 75, something like that. And I hooked up with a couple guys, one got back from Vietnam, and these guys became really my first sponsors. They were my mentors. They ran illegal gambling games every night. We were unloading train loads of dope from Mexico. I landed in Apache Junction, Arizona, landing plane. They owned 3 porno stores. I became the night manager. They're selling dirty books to people. And I'm sitting here thinking, boy, isn't life grand? Ain't I living large? How exciting is this? All the good things that are going on, and not realizing that this is really a low-rent, rotten lifestyle. And these guys were like amazing. I really looked up to them. They're making tons of money, and their motto was, "We'd never steal anything from you. We'd rather have you give it to us." And I thought that was so deep. They were con men. They had 9 names on their mailbox, and none of them were theirs. They were way ahead of the curve. They were smuggling stuff in from Morocco. It was crazy. So this is the lifestyle I'm living in. I'm thinking I'm really doing good. I went bouncing back and forth to New Jersey, bringing back weed, doing all this stuff, smuggling things. And then I came back and I hooked up with a beautiful young girl that I knew in high school. And I asked her to marry me up at Buttermilk Falls. We were camping out under the stars one night. And I told her I was going to take her on the adventure of a lifetime, and I guarantee I lived up to that billing. So I took off back to Arizona again for 6 months, showed up back right before the wedding, and we got married, and we were off to the races. We lived in Pennsylvania for a while out in a cabin. We left that cabin. We bought a Harley, of course, had to have the Harleys, 19 years old, built an old Harley up. Went to California, went to Arizona. We were just all over the place. We lived in a tent, we lived in a truck, we lived in a camper. It was a different time, it was the 70s, and we were just rolling with it. All the meantime, my addiction is growing. I'm really getting out of my mind. I was a real garbage head. Alcohol was the first thing I ever had. Alcohol was the last thing I ever had. But, my tolerance for alcohol became unlimited. And, I did anything. If it was acid around, I took acid. If it was, downers, uppers, anything. And then the 80s came with the cocaine craze, which was really the express train to the bottom for me. I just threw it into overdrive. So now, instead of having a party and it's all fun and ha ha ha, we're making money and having a good time. Now I'm doing coke by as much as I could take. And I'm living in a cocaine psychosis. So I'm out of my mind. In the meantime, my wife got pregnant, and she's telling me, believe it or not, I had hair at one time, so she told me, you gotta get a haircut, you gotta get a job, we have a baby here, and I'm parking my Harley in the house, I'm driving it right into the kitchen, I'm driving it to the living room, I'm so paranoid somebody's gonna steal it, I'm out of my mind, and she's just like shaking her head like, I can't take this anymore. So, make a long story short, my wife and son, I felt, were slowing me down, so I'm ready to leave my wife and my son in Arizona and come back to New Jersey. And the day before I was supposed to leave them, I went out with a couple of good time friends, all coked out of my mind, and I wrecked my Harley. I drove it into a ditch at about 80 miles an hour, and I woke up on a helicopter. I was about 40 miles from anything. I was out in the desert, and that's how I woke up. And I wound up in the hospital. And I was out of my mind. I was screaming, yelling. I had a traumatic brain injury. I took a couple hundred stitches in the head. They told me they're going to amputate my leg. I still have a bunch of hardware in there. I broke my back, my hands, my feet, you name it. I did it. And I'm still being an arrogant, rotten alcoholic, screaming at the nurses. I'll be tap dancing out of here, yelling and screaming. And when they close that little curtain around you in the emergency room? And you're alone in there, and I was like, for the first time in many, many years, I thought I was an atheist after my Catholic school adventures. But when I remember when they closed that door and they closed that little curtain, I remember saying, God, they're going to cut my effing leg off. You know what I mean? If you're out there, I could really use a hand right now. And, that was the first moment of sanity I had in many years. I wound up, miracles started to happen. A doctor who didn't work in that hospital, they transferred me to his hospital. He wound up saving my leg. He was out of medical school about 3 weeks. I think I was the first guy he operated on. First, the guy was an older guy. He said he's going to take it. This guy said, hey, I can save it. So they implanted all this hardware in there and, put me in traction and all the good stuff that goes with a broken back and my head's as big as a balloon. They wound up putting me there for a few months and then I wound up home. And I didn't even think that alcohol or drugs was the reason I was in this situation. I just thought it was a bad problem. It could happen to anybody. Anybody could have this situation. And I wound up going home. Paula stayed with me. She took me back to our apartment. It was a second floor apartment. The first thing I did was throw my crutches over the balcony, hop down the stairs on my ass, and walk 1.5 miles in 110-degree heat in Phoenix to the bar, because that's how much I needed to drink. None of that made any difference. I needed it like I needed to breathe. And my friends would bring over drugs, and I had an open script for Demerol, which if anybody knows that that's a heavy opiate. So, I'm off to the races again. This is only a flesh wound, And I'm looking at all the creativity in this room and all the things that, people make, because alcoholics and addicts are really some of the most creative people ever. We really think outside the box. I wound up making a beer holder for each crutch, so I could drink on the long hop back from the liquor store. I could wrap a couple around my six-pack ring, put one in each deal, and then I went to the patent office. I'm patenting this thing. Everybody's gonna want one of these when they wreck their bike, So you can drink when you're in your crutches. I'm gonna be on these for years. I might as well get comfortable. So that's what I did. So things got progressively worse. I was circling the drain, and I used to think someday I would come back to New Jersey and I'd be wealthy and I'd be like Jesus coming into town, on my little borough. Oh, Brian's back. How wonderful. I came back like a bum. I was a total bum, dragging my unhappy family with me. We came back here. I was unemployable. We had an old piece of junk truck that we towed with the U-Haul back here, and we moved into Belleville. And I got worse and worse and worse and worse. It just got progressively worse. So my wife, by this time, 6 years later, she made, part of the reason I'm standing here is she got well. She went and she started going to treatment. She said, this can't be normal. This cannot be a normal life. We're living like this for 13 years now. And she says, she started going to treatment. So she started changing. So when I came home, I'd be gone for days at a time. I pushed the old button, she didn't react the same way. She was getting tools in her toolbox that allowed her to think differently. She was going to therapy, she was going to Al-Anon, she was changing, and she made a decision that she didn't care anymore. Like if our marriage was over, if our house was going to be gone or whatever the deal, she didn't care. She was willing to do that for her sanity, which made me look at myself. So one day I woke up behind a body shop on the ground in Nutley, New Jersey, which should have been a clue because I was pretty nutley myself, and I hadn't been home for days, and I woke up there, and it was August 2nd, 1990, and I walked out to the sun, and I remember standing there in this field and thinking about asking God for help in that room. So if I had not had that accident, I wouldn't have had that to draw on. I saw my life collapsing around me again. I saw it was all coming to an end, and I cried out to God for help. And when I did, God answered my prayers again. I called Paula that day. I wound up in treatment that day, and it was an interesting experience because I hate to be told what to do. Now they're telling me when you wake up what you're going to do, all this stuff, and I am like defiant. I have it squared, and I will not listen. But I decided I was going to give it a shot. I figured I was going to die if I didn't, so I would do it. And I stayed there for 28 days. And it was funny, I came out of detox, and I walked into a room, and they were doing the first step. And they handed me a book, and I couldn't read because I'd been smoking so much dust and crack for the period of these 6 months, I couldn't focus. I didn't think I was ever going to come back. And, the guy said, just sit down and listen. And I'll never forget what they said, who among us cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one, of course. which is the first line in the first step of the book, the step book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's when they had me. Because I knew, like, that's me. I never would admit. If you kill me if you must, but don't ask me to admit I'm wrong. And I did that. I stayed for 28 days, and I had another little epiphany. For the first time since I was a teenager, I didn't drink and drug for 28 days. I'm like, what's going on here? So, something's really happening here. So they suggested I go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting the day I left. So I tried it. I said, okay. I went to this place called the Pyramid Club in Newton, New Jersey. Yeah, and the Pyramid Club was an old speakeasy. It was on the 3rd floor of this place. It had a bar in it and everything. And it was really like the Star Wars bar. There was all kinds of strange people, big heads, all kinds of weird stuff going on. Everybody was odd. Everybody was out there. It was the perfect place for a guy like me to get sober. And I kept going there. Then they told me, things like, you should try getting a job. Like going to work every day, that kind of deal. Which really I found a little offensive, but everything else they told me seemed to work, so I might as well go try it. So I got a job unloading trucks for a large retailer in East Hanover. So now I'm either at work, I'm at home trying to save my marriage, or I'm at a meeting. And my wife really wasn't interested in having me home, to be quite frank. She made it perfectly clear. But I wasn't going to give up, because that's the kind of guy I am. I think about all the times I stood in front of a tenement in New York City and said, I'll risk it all. I'm going to go in there. Everybody's got a gun, but I'm going in there and I'm coming out with what I need. Like, that's commitment. I would risk my health, my life, my family, everything to get what I need. And I realize now that was really a skill set that I was misusing. So I wound up working at that place for a while, and we couldn't catch up on our bills. Things were bad, so I wound up taking on a second full-time job. I was building decks and all kinds of stuff. So I'm working 80 hours a week, and I'm not getting ahead. And they told me something else, get a sponsor. So I got this crazy guy he was from the South Bronx. His family was off the boat from Ireland. He was totally nuts, but he was good for me. And I finally said, I can't keep up like this. Like, I can't continue. He says, I was waiting for you to ask me. So I said, well, what can I do? He says, listen. He goes, you have skill sets, and every alcoholic does, that you don't even know you have. He goes, what kept you alive on the street, they don't teach in Harvard Business School. He says, you can walk in a room, he says, I can trust her. She looks a little shifty in the corner. I better keep an eye on that one in the back of the phone. So they said, that's a feeling you get. He goes, that's part of your gifts from God. He goes, but you've been misusing that. He goes, if you took that and you kept the moral and ethical standards needed to stay sober, and you combine them with your natural gifts, there'd be no stopping you. So that's what I did. He said, try it in business. So I went back to the place I worked, and it was a retail establishment. They had about 300 employees, between 250 and 300, and they did $1 million a week in sales. I have no college degree. I have no idea what's going on. I've never been in retail. But I'm looking around there saying, God, these are some dumb guys working here in management. I said, I should have these guys in my back pocket. And instead, they're telling me how much I'm going to earn, when I'm going to get off from work, how my family's going to live. So rather than, alcoholics think differently. Like I said, we think outside the box. So rather than try to undermine the people in authority, I went to the guy who was my immediate supervisor, who was the lead man, and I said, you seem to know what's going on here. I said, do you have any ambitions to do better someday? He says, well, yeah, I do. I said, why don't we do this? You teach me everything you know. Delegate what you can to me, and I'll do your job, and you do the same thing for your boss. So that's what we did. And I pushed him up to the next level, and he would pull me up behind him. Within 5 years, I was running, probably 4.5 years, I was running that store. Within 7 years, I was running the Mid-Atlantic division for this company, with thousands and thousands of people working for me, making more money than I ever thought of. Stock options, all kinds of crazy stuff. And, in my heart, I still had that self-esteem issue, like that if they really knew who I was, they'd throw me out of the building, But it's a funny thing, the guys the higher up I went in this company, like the guys who owned it were billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. And they had ethics problems that I never thought of having. I knew junkies that had better morals than some of these guys had. But, it was interesting. I realized that I could get ahead. So I stayed there for a while, and all of a sudden I'm believing my own BS. Boy, how smart am I? Ain't I wonderful? Pat myself on the back. I built the house of my dreams. My son's going to fancy private college, and his first guy went to college, so instead of going to AA meetings every day, I'm going, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm making a guest appearance once a month, walking in. And before you know it, life hit me with a whole load of my own stuff. That broken back wound up going out on me. I was paralyzed. I couldn't get out of bed. I went back into the hospital, and I was in bed for 6 months. My father-in-law was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he was fading away, so it put family strain. I wound up in litigation with the company I was working for because it was underchanging. So all these things started happening. I was facing financial, physical, career, all these issues and family issues, and I wasn't close to AA. I wasn't close to NA. I had no skill set. I had no phone numbers, and I almost picked up a drink. I was that close. Thank God I didn't. And when I didn't, I made the decision that I was going to never fade away. I was going to keep my recovery first. Nothing was more important than me staying sober, because anything I put before my sobriety, I'll lose anyway. So I had to keep that first, and that's what I did. It all worked out. I came out the other end. I became an entrepreneur. I started a business. I hit the real estate market when it was just going up, and I started flipping houses. Because I was flipping houses, everybody's like, so my construction crew, now I'm building houses. I'm building with this crew. I'm making money again, everything's going, but AA is staying first. When the collapse happened in the early 2000s, I almost lost everything again. But I made up my mind that, God never throws anything at me that I can't handle. During that time, my sister died of a heroin overdose. And it was really rough on the family, And then I watched all the money and all the things we have saved up for it fading away because, power greater than myself, the U.S. economy. And I was like, I started laughing because I have all this debt. I'm like, well, I'm thinking, who would let me that money anyway? Didn't they know who I am? They expect to be paid back, And I made up my mind that I was going to pay everybody back, and I did. And that's when I decided to change my life course again, and I wrote my first book. And it was great because we're defiant by nature alcoholics, and they said, people would tell me, oh yeah, you'll never write a book. Who are you to write a book? You'll never sell any, all the typical nonsense. And the more they told me, the more I said, guess what? Wrong guy. Guy told me when I came out of treatment, good friend, Bart, told me when I came out of treatment, you'll be drinking in a week. He did me the biggest favor of my life. I say sober out of spite. That's just what I did. That's how I'm made. So I wound up doing this book, and it wound up going on Amazon, and it went bestseller, hit the top 5. And then from there, I got a call from a Hollywood director, a guy who was, directed films for Universal. I love this book. I got 7 years sober. Would you like to take me through it? And I'm like, well, I can't put him up at the Newton Holiday Inn, so what am I going to do with this guy? So he comes back, and God provides. I started praying for what's the next move. It was the time for the real estate collapse. I got a call from a realtor. I said, I know a guy who's got this estate up in Blairstown, New Jersey. It's thousands of square feet. It's spectacular. It's on 100 acres of land. 25 is deeded to it. The rest is farm assessed. I wound up opening a halfway house. From there, we wound up going and opening a licensed treatment facility in Fairfield, New Jersey, where we help mostly first responders. From a business standpoint, they have great insurance, and they're the type of folks that really feel uncomfortable walking into a 12-step meeting because half the people in there they've arrested. It's a little uncomfortable. Hey, get me off. The cops are drunk. That kind of stuff. So, it just kept unfolding, and then now, we saw that there's so many people that need help that cannot get help, and that's where my mental health came from, because we developed a software program for that treatment center that is being used by insurance companies, is being used by benefits providers and things like that. But unless you have benefits, you can't get it. And it's a year-long program. And the biggest hurdles we found for people to get help is nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I'm an alcoholic or an addict. Nobody wants to walk in the door and say, I have this problem. They don't want to notify their spouse. They don't want to tell their boss, their insurance company. So we made a program, a digital program that's interactive, that anybody could use. It's like having a recovery coach or a sponsor in your pocket. It's got over 500, almost 600 interactive videos. It has assessments, and it also has a PTSD program. Because you'd be surprised how many people with an alcohol or drug problem suffer from PTSD, from the challenges they've had. So we had that out there, we were selling it, and then we realized there's people who cannot get it, and that's where my mental health came in. So we decided we were going to give it away for free to anybody that needed it. Another reason people don't come into treatment is the moment passes. My sister, who died of a heroin overdose, called me up one day and she said she wanted to get help. I took her over to a detox in Jersey City, and it took 7.5 hours to get her admitted, and by the time they admitted her, she said at this, and she walked out the door, the moments passed. She never got sober, and she did die from it. So we said, this is instant. How do people learn? They Google it. When I get a toe ache, I don't go to the doctor, I Google it and say, why is my toe aching? So that's what people do, with alcohol and drugs too. So now they can download this immediately. We pay, there's costs involved because, the servers have to run, the tech people have to work on it, the help desk has to answer questions. So that's really what we're doing here, is we're trying to figure out how we can keep this thing going and help more people. Because I know at the end of my run, I was unemployed. Health insurance wasn't top of my priority. I was lucky Paula had a job and they covered me. But if it wasn't for that, I never would have got sober. So that's why we really got this thing going. And the reason for us being here today, number one, is to thank all you guys for supporting us. Because without you, we couldn't do this. And with recovery, for me, it's just been a one day at a time thing, like they said. I haven't had it. If I don't drink or don't die or don't drug in the next month and a half, I'll have 33 years clean and sober. That's after. And that's after 20 years of hard drinking and drugging. So anybody can get sober. My dad drank until he was 65 years old, and he was dying of alcoholism, and he got sober at 65. One day he called me up after DUI and says, you seem reasonably happy, what are you doing? I was like, what I'm doing. So he did the same thing, and he's 89 years old now, and he hasn't had a drink since he's 65 years old. So you're never too old, you're never too young to get sober. And I look around the room with all the creativity and all the things. I heard this story. It's this guy, he's banging on his son's door. Wake up, he's yelling at him. You gotta go to school. And he's like, I don't wanna go. He's banging on the door. Wake up, you gotta go to school. He goes, I'm not going. He goes, well, why not? He goes, well, it's boring, it's dull. The kids all treat me mean down there, and he goes through this whole litany of stuff. I hate it. So the father bangs the door and says, well, wake up. He goes, I'm going to give you a couple of reasons. One, it's your duty. It's your responsibility to go to school. He goes, two, you're 45 years old. And three, you're the principal. You know what I mean? So that's what it is. Like, here's a guy suffering through his life, not achieving his purpose, his destiny. And most of us do that. We all have a purpose. We all have a reason for being born. We all have a gift that the Creator has built into our hearts. And for me, I had to get over my fear of using it. I was given a lot of good advice by a lot of people who loved me. They thought it was good advice. It was crummy advice. They told me the same bad advice that somebody who loved them told them. And they passed it along to me. And when I became sober, I realized that now I can make a decision of who I want to be, what limitations I'm going to put on myself, what God put into my heart, and which direction I'm going to head. And I don't have to listen to anybody else that defines things. But, if I put it to good use. So, if you're new in recovery, or if you're in recovery, this is an dress rehearsal. This is your life. This is the only one you're going to get. Even if you think you're coming back again next time, this is the only one you're going to get this time around. So you might as well go out there and make it fun. Enjoy life. I look for joy now. I used to chase excitement and a high. And I looked up the word joy, and it means calm delight. And I was like, calm delight? I can really get with that. You know what I mean? I don't need any excitement anymore. A little calm delight is wonderful. So if you're fulfilling your purpose and you're enjoying your life, you'll have some calm delight. and this is the easier, softer way. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here. I really would. And with that, I'm gonna, thank you. And we have an incredible speaker coming up here. Bruce, he's going to introduce himself, but Bruce has been so gracious to us. He is a social media influencer. He's got hundreds of thousands of people that follow him. He's a complete success story. He's an artist. He's authentic. He's himself. And that's all, what the guy told me that in recovery. Be yourself, everybody else is taken. So with that, I'm going to bring up Bruce. And the one thing you know about Bruce is the Irish say, "'Tis himself."